Hello again. Well, this didn't go too well. After contending with bad weather, work commitments and life in general, I thought, I know, I'll pop out and do the Mini 2 versus Mini 3 Pro low light comparison. My initial plan was to go near the National Space Centre in Leicester. I know that it lights up in the evening and I thought it would make for a great subject. There were just two minor flaws with this plan. Firstly, it started raining again as I arrived, so I had to wait about 30 minutes before it stopped. And secondly, it didn't light up, which was a fairly major flaw if I'm honest. So the next evening I tried again. This was a bit more successful. I went to Ashby-de-la-Zouch, and while I was flying, 3 separate people stopped for a chat. A couple of them were curious as to what I was doing, and one of them obviously saw what I was doing and was curious about the drone. I explained what I was up to and showed them the screen and the footage that you can see at the moment. And to be fair, all 3 of them went away positive. So far I've not had a bad experience with anybody, but I'm sure my time will come. Anyway, I digress. I decided to approach the initial test of the 12 megapixel JPEGs a little differently this time. Somebody commented on my previous video that it would be unlikely that anyone with a knowledge or experience of photography would shoot JPEG. Whilst this is true, a new operator might. So although I will spend less time on the 12 megapixel JPEG in general, I decided to leave the settings to fully automatic to see if their processing was better than mine. It wasn't. So let's check out the results and see what we have. Okay, so here we've got the 2 JPEGs taken by the drones in full automatic settings. I made copies of them, which are these 2 images here, and applied Lightroom's automatic correction to them, but we'll come to those in a moment. First off, let's have a look at the 2 straight out of camera JPEGs. Okay, so side by side we can see straight away that there's a different colour science being applied by the sensor here. If we look at the sky in particular, on the left we can see the Mini 2. The sky is more subdued in comparison to the Mini 3 on the right. In essence, the sensor's exposed in both cases, primarily for the sky, and left the foreground somewhat underexposed. I was rather hoping that the Mini 3 automatic settings might actually compensate for that, but I had no reason to expect it, but given that it had the f1.7 or has the f1.7 sensor, I did wonder if that might be a possibility, but clearly it isn't. If we have a look at the images, we can see obviously there are more lights on in the Mini 3 image here, which does lend it a somewhat warmer appearance than the Mini 2 image. Let's zoom into this car park area here and compare the 2 side by side. Essentially the Mini 2 image on the left, we do have quite a lot of noise apparent in it. Bear in mind this is fully automatic, so noise reduction would have been applied by the drone and its software. And the Mini 3 image is cleaner. Light levels are fairly accurate, to be honest, and given that the Mini 3 image was taken some 14 minutes after the Mini 2. Now if we look at the 2 cars, the red car and the blue car, I think the detail is clearly better in the Mini 3 image, and not at the expense of more noise or artifacts. If we look at the ends of these 2 buildings here, we can see that the signage and general detail levels are better in the Mini 3 image. So in terms of straight out of camera, even though the light levels were worse for the Mini 3, I would have to say the Mini 3 has done a better job. Next, let's have a look at the images which I've put into Lightroom to apply its automatic adjustments to. So again, not much difference in terms of the colour science, or indeed the warmth. The Mini 3 image appears to be warmer. If we look at the car park area again, just move it slightly so that they match up nicely. We can see similar things to before. What Lightroom has done obviously is boosted the shadows somewhat in both cases, which doesn't seem to have affected the noise particularly badly in the Mini 2 image, but it does seem to have increased the noise levels in the Mini 3 image. Nevertheless, given that it was darker when the Mini 3 image was taken, I think it's fair to say that overall it's done a pretty good job. Given these are JPEGs, quite good at 100%. So next let's have a look at the RAW images. Okay, so let's switch over to the DNG digital negative files. In this instance we've got 4 images. As you can see here, again the second and fourth image are copies which have had corrections applied to them. In this instance though, the corrections have been done by me as opposed to leaving it to Lightroom's automatic settings. First off, let's have a look at the RAW straight from the camera. So, as you would expect really with unedited low light RAW images, the shadows need a lot of adjustment. But looking at the sky, personally I think the Mini 3 image is more pleasing. The Mini 2 is alright, but there's a little more contrast and dynamic range in the sky on the Mini 3 image. If we zoom into the car park area again, which you'd be forgiven if you can't make it out, but we can see that the f1.7 lens has enabled the sensor to capture more light on the Mini 3 image here. So there's more detail apparent, largely because there's more light levels available. And again, if we move somewhat over to the right here, we can see this pub, public house, has garden lights in the beer garden. Strangely, on the Mini 2 image they all appear to be yellow lights or white lights. On the Mini 3 image it's actually managed to resolve the fact that they are multicoloured lights. There's not a lot to be gained from looking at those anymore, so let's move on to the processed images for comparison. Here we can see the M3 sensor, the Mini 3 Pro sensor, coming into its own. The shadow detail is significantly improved over the Mini 2 image, with no cost really to noise. Again, if we zoom into our favourite car park, we can see quite clearly that the image from the Mini 3 here is cleaner. There's more detail apparent, and there is also less noise apparent. And we should also consider that in doing that it actually had less light to work with. Again, if we move across to those garden lights in the beer garden, we can see the same effect, although there is more colour information here than there was on the unedited one. It still doesn't match the colour information shown on the edited Mini 3 Pro image. The illumination on the high street is also better on the Mini 3 Pro, and I think you'd have to agree that the detail levels as we move along the high street are significantly better than those on the Mini 2 image. Next, let's have a look at the leisure centre, which is this sort of building here. And again, the differences are quite spectacular in this instance. Despite lower light levels, the detail resolution is far higher on the Mini 3 image. Particularly if you look at these lines in the car park. If we can zoom into those a little bit more to give you a better view. So we've got, we're up at nearly 200% here obviously, so this really is pixel peeping, but if you look at these lines, they can quite clearly be made out on the Mini 3 image, not so much on the Mini 2 image. I should state really that I processed these images in order to try and get the best from each of the drones, so they weren't processed identically, but they are the best that I could get out of each of the raw files. If we look at the sky as well, again up at nearly 200%, let's bring that back down to 100%, there or thereabouts. there is quite a significantly greater level of detail in these clouds in the image on the Mini 3. So the next two images we're going to look at were taken using the drone's automatic exposure bracketing function. They were then imported to Lightroom, and I used the HDR facility, the merge facility within Lightroom, to create an HDR image from both drones. As we can see from the overview, in terms of shadow detail, both images are much better than what we've seen previously. We've still got the colour differences in the sky, but neither of them has done a bad job there. If we zoom into the car park area that we've been looking at in previous images, we can see straight away that the image from the M3 is significantly sharper. If we look at the detail around the cars and on the lines in the floor, the M3 image is crisper. And as we move along the high street again, there's quite a significant difference between the two images here. I mean, I'm not entirely sure if you'll be able to make this out on YouTube, but certainly looking at the screen in front of me, there's a very significant difference between the two. If we move up to the leisure centre, again here, this building, the detail from the Mini 3 is vastly superior to that from the Mini 2. Again, we're about 100%, so you know the Mini 2 is not doing badly, but the differences are quite significant. If we look down on the bottom right here, we can see there's this tower. I'll try and match them up as best I can here, and this is right in the corner of the image, so obviously cameras struggle a little bit. Well, some cameras struggle a little bit in the corners, but we can see the purple lighting on the tower on the M3 image is quite clear. On the M2 image, there's a hint, but it's not quite pulling it off to the same extent as the Mini 3. And again, if we move up to the beer garden, the image from the Mini 3 over here is much better in terms of colour resolution and detail than the image from the Mini 2. There is a hint of softness or smearing perhaps with the Mini 2 image, which isn't present on the Mini 3 image. Having said all of that, the bracketing function on the Mini 2 does a great job. It does remain a fantastic drone, and up at 100%, you know, these images from both drones are not bad at all, given that they're only 12 megapixel sensors. If we look, there's another pub here, another public house. It's quite well lit up in both images. We'll bring that up a little bit to see the difference. There is significantly more detail in the Mini 3 image than the Mini 2, but again we're about 160% near enough now, so you know, you can't expect miracles from either drone. Overall, I think both images are quite pleasant to look at. The low light capability of the Mini 3 here with this bracketed image does stand out quite well. So next we're going to have a look at three different images. For these three images, the first two, the leftmost and centre, were taken using the bracketing function on the two drones. And when I imported them to Lightroom, before doing anything else, I enhanced all three images from each drone. Then I merged them using the Lightroom HDR merge to generate what's effectively a 48 megapixel image from the bracketed exposures. The third image is the straight 48 megapixel image from the Mini 3 Pro. So if we have a look and compare them side by side, we'll get a good idea of what's achievable. I'll look at image 1 and 2 side by side. And I think the first thing to notice, obviously the colour science variation is there again between the two images. If we zoom into the car park area and let's line them up a little bit there, I think it's fairly apparent here that the difference between the Mini 2 and the Mini 3 Pro wouldn't be too difficult to discern the improvements on the Mini 3 Pro's image. It's clearer, the dynamic range is improved, the noise control on both images is quite good, but the detail levels with the Mini 3 image are significantly better. If we move up to the area where the garden lights are, there's a bit of an anomaly here. The Mini 2 image actually looks somewhat crisper where the lights are. Colour information's not there again. But if we look at the Mini 3 image, the colour information is there, but there appears to be a little bit of softness around the lights. Now my suspicion with this is that obviously this was 3 separate images taken at different exposure levels and taken quite significantly darker or lower light levels. Now I suspect what might have happened here is either a breeze caught the lights and moved them, or a breeze caught the drone and moved it in the case of the Mini 3. Next, let's move up the high street and compare two images. So it's fair to say obviously that the Mini 3 is capturing significantly more light even though it's darker. In fairness, if you look at the details around the windows, the Mini 3 again is significantly improved over the Mini 2's image. Bear in mind these are 12 megapixel images that have been merged together. It's not like we're using a 48 megapixel image from the Mini 3 here. Nevertheless, the improvements are significant. And again, as we move up onto the leisure centre, the improvement in dynamic range on the Mini 3 is quite significant, particularly if you look at this field here and the sort of whitish grey walls of the leisure centre here. There used to be an open air swimming pool there, I think it's no more though. And again, the detail in the parking spaces for the leisure centre here are clearly resolved in the Mini 3 image, not so much in the Mini 2 image. Lastly, let's have a look at the enhanced HDR from the Mini 3 Pro compared to the 48 megapixel image from the Mini 3 Pro, and compare those two to see what differences we can see. There's obviously a difference in processing there, but essentially the colour science is more or less the same. These images essentially look similar, but if we move in and take a closer look, there are differences to be seen. I think as regards the car park, the bracketed image, the details are better. It's marginal, I mean it's not a massive difference, but I think the details around the vehicles are better. It looks somewhat crisper to my eyes, particularly when you look at these lines in this area compared to these on the 48 megapixel image. Interestingly as well, as we move up to the pub lights, the 48 megapixel image strangely seems to have lost some of the colour information from the lights compared to the bracketed image. So let's do what we did before and move on up the high street. I have to say here that the bracketed image, to my eyes, looks to be somewhat sharper and better detailed than the 48 megapixel image. The gentleman standing down here, in comparison to my eyes, is sharper. Likewise the window detail in these buildings, there's not very much in it, it's quite marginal, and both images are certainly acceptable, but they do look better to me. And again with the leisure centre here, the HDR image gives a better impression than the 48 megapixel image. Maybe the 48 megapixels more realistic, but nevertheless, in terms of crispness and detail, I think the HDR image takes it. So that pretty much concludes it in terms of comparing the images side by side, and I have to say I think the Mini 3 Pro does take the win for this, as you would really expect. But nevertheless, the Mini 2 does give a very good account of itself. So as we move on to my concluding thoughts, I'll have a look at an image that I took of Ashby Castle using the Mini 3. It was truly dark, although you didn't get that impression from the image I took. So after the comparison photos, I flew the 3 around for a while. Its low light video capability is quite amazing. While doing this, I grabbed an image of Ashby Castle, which came out quite nicely given that it was nearly 10 in the evening. So, in conclusion, in low light the Mini 3 Pro has it. Not by a massive margin, it has to be said, but enough. This is just my opinion and that's all it is, so, you know, take it or leave it. But personally I think the Mini 3 Pro images are better, for stills quality certainly, in low light than the Mini 2. The video performance is also pretty much outstanding, as you can see from these shots that we're seeing here. There is a significant difference as to how each sensor handles colour information, but that information can be adjusted in post using Lightroom or Capture One or any other editor really. The Mini 2 does, like I said earlier, give a really good account of itself, and in decent light levels it does a fantastic job. The low light capabilities of the Mini 3 Pro are undeniable though. If you've enjoyed this video or found it useful, please like and subscribe. Thanks and bye for now.